This is good enough for a worthless employee. I received an invitation to my wife's office for a get-together. But when we got to the location, we saw that trash cans had been positioned in place of our chairs. My wife's boss approached us, seeming a little surprised at the whole thing. I prepared something just right for a worthless employee like you. With such a disrespectful tone, as if he were undermining the very worth of my wife, I was unable to control my rage. I finally snapped when he started making fun of someone we both respected. "Could you call Mr. Ruin, please?" My normally patient wife asked a subordinate worker, looking clearly irate. Mr. Ruin showed there a little bit later, and we greeted him. Mr. Ruin inquired as to the nature of the situation after observing it. The supervisor was as white as a sheet when he soon told the truth. "My name is Patrick. My spouse and I are 56-year-old business owners. Sophia, my spouse, is 6 years my junior and is employed at a different employer at the moment. About 30 years ago, I got to know Sophia through a mutual friend. Our same interests allowed us to connect despite our modest age differences, and now here we are. Our 2 sons are grown up, married men with families of their own. My oldest son is currently training to become my company's manager since I intend for him to take over my firm one day. I go somewhere virtually every weekend without fail. Once again, Margaret, I appreciate your support today. As always, I truly appreciate you coming to help." The 70-year-old Margaret owns and operates a bento cafe. Her husband used to co-manage the shop with her, but he passed away from illness a few years ago, so she is now the only one who runs it. Margaret has supported me ever since I was a student, frequently getting me bentos at a deal when I was having financial difficulties. She's been a great assistance to me and many others like me, and her shop has survived because both locals and regulars adore it. I was helping out as usual this particular day when, at about midday, a man entered the business. With a scowl, he peered around the store and asked, "What is this place? It is incredibly antiquated." George is Sophia's supervisor and a very nasty man. He is already the head of the sales department at the age of 34. It's thought that he will eventually take over the corporation. His wife, Grace, is the president's daughter. Whatever his position, though, I can't ignore remarks this rude about the store. I made the decision to speak up. "Excuse me, but isn't it rude to be so disrespectful right when you walk in?" "Oh, so suddenly this store offends its patrons." Without even the tiniest trace of regret, George remarked, "I guess when the shop's like this, the employees are just as low class." He must be new to this place based on his attitude. How could someone acting in such an unfamiliar manner in a foreign place? I was on the verge of answering him just as he had indicated. Moreover, George didn't alter his patronizing tone of voice when speaking. "Grace asked me to come buy a bento, but you better offer a good bento." George sent me a disdainful look and remarked, "This shop is finished if you serve something bad." Despite the fact that he shouldn't have such power, his actions gave the impression that, simply because he will be the next president, the world revolved around him. Someone who is so obviously haughty is someone I can't like. I started to respond, but Margaret stopped me because I was so enraged. She then turned to George and smiled gently, saying, "I apologize if the shop looks old and offends you. Could you please pardon us? I'll make the bento less expensive." George looked over and chuckled, seeming satisfied with Margaret's submissive demeanor, stating, "The elderly woman comprehends your role considerably more. Hey, old man, you really ought to get a customer service mindset." With that, he accepted the handed bento and walked out of the store. Margaret smiled and remarked, "You shouldn't take such a thing seriously," to me, who was still agitated. Individuals who are merely arrogant about their status ought to be dismissed with ease. I see, that's enlightening. I couldn't help but smile bitterly as I observed Margaret's complete lack of reaction, thinking, I still had a long way to go. When I told Sophia what had happened at the bento shop after I got home, She looked annoyed. George appears to act haughtily at the corporation as well. Despite her repeated warnings, it seemed that he reacted angrily. On the other hand, he acts civilly toward Grace and his superiors. Internally, they don't think well of George, but they also don't speak out aggressively because he will be the next president. He will eventually be in charge of the company, therefore it would be problematic if he didn't cool down a little. Sophia sighed after saying that. Then, after a while, President Ruan demanded that I attend a meeting that was being conducted at Sophia's workplace. Naturally, because I had no excuse not to go, I made the decision to go to the meeting. When we arrived at the location on the day of the meeting, we welcomed our invited acquaintances and made our way to our designated seats. However, we were met with an incredible scene in the next instant. We were shocked to see trash cans in place of the chairs that were supposed to be at our seats. "What's this all about? Have you heard anything, Sophia?" "No, not at all. This is too much, even in jest." While we were perplexed, George came up to us. "At last you arrived, you useless worker. Thus, you're the shop's elderly proprietor, correct? This elderly woman cannot have you for a spouse, can you?" George said while sneering at us. Moreover, with a broad smile, he started talking about the garbage can. "What are your thoughts? Wasn't the surprise I planned a big success? Did he really mean what he said? This isn't shocking. Harassment is harassment, and regardless of your perspective, it's always unpleasant." Sophia addressed George since he was not displaying any symptoms of regret. "George, why are you doing this to us? It's evident, of course, isn't it? I set up the ideal seats for a useless worker such as yourself. It is ridiculous to use a trash can as a seat." His words, as though they denied our fundamental identity, left us unable to control our rage. "Is this the seat then? Keep me out of your hair. Is this sufficient for such a useless worker?" That was said by George, who remained unfazed by my irate yell. I was furious that he had been labeling Sophia a useless employee for some time now, but I also had a lot to say about his actions and mindset. First of all, Sophia has been a dedicated employee of the present organization for around 30 years. It's not hyperbole, in my opinion, to describe her as a major contributor who has long supported the sales department. As a matter of fact, I am frequently visited by subordinate staff members who are envious of her. Someone labeling her a worthless employee was something I could not stand. Please explain why my wife is deserving of the moniker worthless. George looked down on me and stated, "This old woman keeps nitpicking at the way I do things," as I pressed him further. "Anybody who disagrees with their supervisor is inherently unworthy." What a crude reaction. Since he is expected to run the company in the future, Sophia has been trying to correct him. However, he ignores her corrections as backtalk and continues to annoy her. I began to genuinely wonder if a person like him should ever hold the position of CEO. Sophia, who had up until then remained mute, suddenly said, her face serious, "George, you're going to be running this company. You won't be able to safeguard your staff if you act in this way, and no one will follow you." Her intention was not to be confrontational. Sophia has frequently shown her love for the business and her sincere worries about its future. Those remarks were also spoken with concern for George's future. But it didn't seem like he understood that at all. "Why can't you just take a hint?" He shouted angrily, clicking his tongue. "You're the one causing trouble for the department since you consistently disobey your boss." If his assertion were accurate, Sophia would lose all respect. But in all honesty, it's she, not him, who is genuinely admired. Any employee in the sales division would undoubtedly have nothing but positive things to say about her if you questioned them. Is it really necessary to single her out for attack simply because she made a small criticism? While I was thinking about this, George said something really unexpected. "To be honest, I've always felt that you were in the way. It annoys me because even though I'm the department head, everyone seems to like you." At last I realized he's just jealous of Sophia. Although he probably doesn't get much criticism because of his position, he doesn't have the same level of respect as Sophia. It is evident from listening to our visiting juniors that they have low opinion of George. He must have been disturbed by someone who was more respected than he was to voice his concerns, which is why he resorted to such small-time intimidation. Naturally, though, I was unable to put up with this behavior. When I finally had enough, I raised my voice and said, "Enough. It is completely out of line what you did at the bento shop and here." George shot back, "Oh please, a guy who's been cast out by society has no right to lecture someone like me," in reaction to what I had said. "It's likely that you're employed at that bento store because you're having trouble finding another place to work." He seemed to think that I worked at Margaret's shop, although even if I did, it was incredibly forgivable to trash a location unrelated to this. George ignored my response and went on. "A husband who is dependent on a useless employee is as useless, don't you think? In the first place, you weren't even invited to this event." I never thought he would get this far. Even the normally composed Sophia appeared to have had enough. "Could you call Mr. Irwin, please?" she asked a junior employee who was close. Without delay, the junior departed to retrieve Mr. Irwin. "Oh, so you intend to report Mr. Irwin? As the CEO of the future, who you think will support an elderly lady like you?" George's expression was one of victory. He had no idea that he was going to be lowered to the lowest possible level. After a little while, a man came up to us. It was none other than Mr. Benjamin Irwin, the head of the corporation. The workers surrounding us bent their heads the moment he arrived. Everyone calmed down. There's no need to be so formal. However, more crucially, the company president, Mr. Irwin, turned to face me as soon as he began speaking, took a gradual step across, and then abruptly wrapped his arm around my shoulder. "Hey, Tom, you succeeded. If you hadn't, I was prepared to drag you from your home," he declared. "Come on, like our past wouldn't make me miss it. But really, Benjamin, have you gained weight once more?" We were teasing each other lightly, and I answered. George stood there, mouth gaping, utterly startled. Only seconds before, he had been so full of himself. "Mr. Irwin, do you know this man?" George questioned, shocked. "Hey, how dare you refer to our major shareholder as this man?" Someone lost it. Mr. Irwin's statements caused George's eyes to widen with surprise. "Indeed, I am the company's largest shareholder and have known Mr. Irwin since our time in college. We immediately clicked and became best friends while we were students, studying business management. We encouraged one another to pursue our shared goal of becoming business owners, and now we both have. I'd invested by purchasing shares when his company went public because of our bond. By the way, I met Sophia through Mr. Irwin, who introduced us. He said Sophia was a great worker with a kind heart. His support gave me little doubt that Sophia was an important member of the team." George's face became pale now that he understood the issue, and appropriately so. It turned out that the guy he had been disparaging and making fun of was an important member of the team. When Mr. Irwin saw the garbage cans positioned near our chairs, he inquired as to their use. George rushed to speak, fearing for his job, saying, "Hey, who set up this prank? It is inconsiderate to the largest stakeholder." It amazed me how quickly he changed his attitude after having looked down on us a few moments before. The icy gazes directed towards him indicated that others shared his thoughts. Sophia and I weren't going to allow him to get away with pretending he wasn't involved and placing the responsibility elsewhere. "George, get over acting phony. I take it that you were the one who planned this entire thing." "What? You don't have any evidence." His denials were becoming pitiful at this point. There were so many witnesses that it would be futile to try to hide the facts. A female employee then raised her voice, claiming to have proof, and she produced her smartphone. She had captured the whole thing on camera. One of Sophia's subordinates, this worker was a frequent visitor to our house. Given that she was near in age to our sons, We regarded her like a daughter. She must have been unable to see us being tormented since she covertly taped everything as proof. Mr. Rowan scowled at George as he started to fear as his self-sabotage was revealed. Grace showed there at that very moment, bringing Margaret along. What's the situation here? Why is there so much agitation? Just difficulty all the way. Mr. Irwin answered, George has done something outrageous, and he started to tell what had happened. With a sigh, Grace seemed to be expecting this. George asked her, Hey Grace, why did you bring that old woman from the bento shop here? As he turned to face her, why? Since Margaret is a significant individual. She supplies bento for our company cafeteria and is my father's benefactor. Yes, Margaret had helped Mr. Rowan when he was a student, just like she had helped me. He'd always claimed that he wanted to serve her bento at his cafeteria if he ever founded a business. That was the extent of his feelings of debt to her, and he kept his word. Mr. Rowan had been a frequent visitor to her shop even after taking office, and Grace had known Margaret since she was a young girl. Margaret told me everything, George. It seems that you offended her, Tom, and the store when I asked you to purchase a bento the other day. No, that's not. Margaret may have promised at the time to overlook it, but she made sure the people who needed to know were informed. How could you think it's okay to look down on so many people? George could not afford to appear indifferent to Mr. Irwin's rage. He was clearly trembling. And if that wasn't enough, Grace gave George a fierce look before disclosing an astonishing reality. George, do you not have a confession to make? Similar to how you interact with other ladies, maybe. The room shook at what she said. All were stunned, with the exception of George, who was suddenly pallid with fright. Grace then started to go into detail. Grace had observed that George had been acting strangely and arriving home late lately. Grace became suspicious of his actions and hired a detective, who ultimately revealed that he was seeing another lady. There was clear proof that the woman was a hostess from a club he often visited, and they had been seen traveling and staying at hotels together. Furthermore, there was alarming information in the audio recordings of George and his partner's chats. After he became president of the company, he had planned to get a divorce from Grace and live with his partner. The sheer audacity of his plot astonished everyone. Everything about this is false. There's someone out to get me. George gave a frantic protest. Oh my goodness. Could you then clarify where the funds you claimed as business expenses actually went? Grace inquired in a pointed tone. A fresh tension pulsed through the room. It appears that a certain sum was expensed without a detailed justification for its usage. It was discovered that the specifics, which included travel expenses and entertainment for clients, were made up. The file was submitted under George's name, probably because he had embezzled the money to treat his mistress. Sweaty and helpless to protect himself, George looked away. Everything Grace had accused him of was obviously true. My rage was heightened by the idea of being made fun of by a man like that. You spent so much time belittling others, but it seems the real worthless employee isn't my wife, it's you. This time, George did not respond, and his silence spoke volumes. Mr. Irwin and Grace approached him. They were clearly furious now. You misled my daughter, treated others badly, and damaged this business. This is not the place for you. You will be granted a divorce if you truly desire one. But please never again show your face to us. George apologized profusely, but it was not enough. He was taken out of the venue by force. After that, Mr. Irwin walked around expressing his regret for disturbing the other staff members and visitors. I went up to check on Mr. Irwin and Grace after things had calmed down. They appeared to be in surprisingly good spirits. To be honest, they were happy to have found the truth and handled the matter before it became worse. As Mr. Rowan had always been unwavering, Grace had obviously inherited this also. Margaret, who had been observing us, spoke up as we were conversing. You two have matured significantly. It appears that I am the one who needs your assistance the most these days. We're sorry for making you uncomfortable, Margaret, Grace, and Mr. Rowan bowed their heads again to Margaret, who simply laughed and said she was happy that everyone had looked out for her, and that it was good to see George put in his place. George was ultimately taken into custody for embezzlement. Naturally, his mistress left him, and he lost his job at the company. Mr. Irwin stated unequivocally that George's destiny will be determined in court, and that there would be no out-of-court settlement. After handing up my company to my son a few years later, Sophia and I took over Margaret's bento store. Since we frequently assisted at the shop, we had been thinking about this for a while, and Margaret was eager to let us take over since she wanted to retire. Our objective is to maintain the tastes that Margaret established while also increasing the shop's level of community affection. Thus, a fresh phase of our existence commenced.